the plan here is I've asked Jason Dean, who's the Enterprise Agile Transformation Coach at Micron Technology, to join me. He and I actually were talking, oh gosh, Jason, I don't know how many weeks ago now, about some of the things you were doing in testing out Weave and experimenting with building some of your own frameworks. And you sent me a copy of your story mapping framework, and I thought, wow, this is awesome. I would love to share this with people. So that was kind of the beginning of how we got here. And through the conversation that we have today, then I think people will get a sense of how you built the framework and then why you decided to make it available and to agree to do this kind of webinar with me. So first, I wanted to just say thank you for doing that, and then also to just introduce you as Jason Dean. He's the Enterprise Agile Transformation Coach at Micron. So would you like to say anything else about what you're doing and what you're focusing on these days?
Sure. Thanks, Laura, and hello, everyone. So, yeah, we're trying to really explore how we can better support and enable the various agile roles we have through our not only our transformation process, but just from our general center of excellence that we have. And so, through that process, we've been trying to evaluate what are the tools and the information and opportunities, maybe interaction opportunities, uh, collaboration opportunities, et cetera, that these roles need. And so as we've been digging into product ownership, which is definitely one of our needs, just like it is for many organizations, we've been looking at how can we really enable product owners to be more effective. And certainly, stakeholder management came up, the idea of being able to understand what it is we're actually needing to build and how do I prioritize that, and who are the people we're really building value for. And so we're looking at different canvases to help us with this process. And we've been talking with Laura, that she mentioned, for quite a while, and just exploring Weave and trying to understand how we can best use it. And so we're excited about the opportunity we have really to explore. And so that's kind of how we got started down this journey, and definitely glad to share today kind of what we're finding and maybe some of the opportunities and challenges that we see as well. So thank you.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is the first in a series of many more, I think, where we're going to be focusing on frameworks specifically. So in terms of the agenda, just a couple of housekeeping notes that I'll mention before we move right into, well, what do I mean by framework? So I'll give you just a little bit of context, but we'll move very quickly into the content that Jason has to share with you. And so what this webinar is not is a training session on how to use the tool specifically. I'll share some resources where you can go if you want to get more specifics on Weave itself. But otherwise, we'll spend some time on the canvas, and then I want us all to join an active Weave forum as well. I did, by the way, start that. So for those of you who read the email that probably went out about an hour ago that had the link to the live forum, you can join up to the point of we call it the lobby, and do that in a separate browser tab. And then when we get about halfway through, we'll end up moving over to the live Weave forum and kind of finish up there. So quick housekeeping. We're recording this, and so if you end up missing some of it, or you join late, or you have to leave a little bit early, or you want to share this with colleagues later on, I'll be sending out the link to everybody at some point, no later than tomorrow. There's the link to the webinar, to the forum URL again. Check your email for that, and then once we get closer, I'll also stick it into the chat. That also reminds me, if you have questions at the moment, everybody is muted. I can unmute folks near the end when we want to do Q&A, so you don't have to type all your questions at the end. We can have a conversation. For now, I'll leave everybody muted. But please, I'm monitoring the chat, and so if you have questions, especially when Jason starts to talk about his story mapping framework, please put them into chat, and I'll make sure that I interject them as he's talking at the right time. When you join, backwards here, but when you join the Weave forum, use the email address that you want, that's already associated with your Weave account. And that's what I'm going to use to grant everybody their 10 training credits. So I'm sure you're all aware that there's different kinds of credits that you can accrue inside Weave, and one of them is certainly the training credits concept. Just really quick, I'll throw this up so you can see mine. But we have a concept of kind of a 10-level belt system. And using Weave and producing events, whether they're inside Weave or actually you can claim credits for producing in-person events as well. This is all managed inside Weave. And for training credits, you'll see down here, I did take this really awesome class by Tendai Vicky. It was a 2-day class, so I got 10 training credits for that one. You'll all receive or 60 credits for that one. You'll all receive 10 for this. So I'll use the email addresses that log into Weave in order to grant the credits at the end of this session. All right, anything else? Oh yeah, so I mentioned that there'll be some resources if you want to learn more about Weave. There's 2 URLs right here. One of them is just off of our Contenio.co website. If you go to the support tab, there's a bunch of videos in there about how to use Weave. And there's also some additional guides and some downloadable how-tos from the second web address that I'm providing there. All right, so before I kind of kick this over to Jason, I thought it would be helpful just to define a framework from the perspective of, I guess, Contenio. So we look at frameworks as kind of the basic tool that knowledge workers are using to solve a problem or to gain alignment. And there's tons of them. You know, we started out life, what, 7, 8, 9 years ago with a book that Luke Holman wrote called Innovation Games. And Innovation Games is a collection of frameworks that were originally designed to get customer insights or market feedback. But, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of frameworks, you know, and obviously we didn't invent most of them. So you're using them already, everything from business model canvas to an empathy map. These are all frameworks. And so essentially what Weave is doing is just making frameworks much more easy to use at scale because we're putting them online. So Weave is, you know, I think there's about 150 frameworks that already exist in Weave, and you can use them as is, or you can extend them or tailor them. But the whole idea is that teams need more, I guess, thinking or business tools for business, or tools for decision making, or tools for prioritization. And so if we can provide more frameworks inside Weave, we're hoping to tackle that lack of you know, the ability for people to collaborate effectively around real problem solving. So that's what Weave is. And it's actually really cool because this framework that Jason's going to talk to us about is actually now available in Weave. So he built it. It's really awesome. And he agreed to kind of publish it as a framework author. And when you go into Weave, you'll actually see that after this webinar, you'll be able to use it there. So I have a poll question. There's 2 of these that we're going to do. The first one is, I'm just wanting to know, have you either done story mapping before? Is this something that you use currently with your teams now? Are you comfortable with it? Or is this new to you? So that's the first poll question. And the second one is, I'm just curious about what the roles are for people who are joining this webinar. So part of what I want to be doing over time is making these, doing them more frequently, and just making sure that all of our users and people who are looking at Weave know about them. So it's helpful for me to know, well, who knows about it so far and who's actually coming. All right, so while you finish that up, it'll probably just take another couple minutes or 2, and I'll certainly share the results of that with all of you. But I think what I'll do is move it over to Jason now. So you're up. We're going to move into talking about story mapping from your perspective, and take it away, Jason.
Excellent, thanks. So obviously I did not invent story mapping. That would be Jeff Patton, and I'm sure you probably have heard about it if you've not used it actively. What I really enjoy about story mapping is really it helps us to perform release planning or big room planning in a structured way. And it really helps us to explore the product or whatever it is we're trying to build. Could be a solution or a service even. What is it that the user is really trying to achieve? So it really introduces the human design element into our planning for outcomes. And so that's super helpful. And as you can see there on the screen, that's kind of what an example story map might look like. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about story maps for those of you who might not have heard about it before, but definitely if you have questions about the end, glad to do that. So there you go. So the basic idea with the product story map is that we start at the top. That means what are the key activities that a user might be participating in with our product. So if we're building Outlook, for example, we might have send an email, schedule a meeting, etc. So these are these high level activities. Many times they're very large items. They could be epics or even themes. And the goal is to try to build a story map by working horizontally across all the key activities that are really important for our user. So maybe we're an example where we're building an MVP and there's 4 or 5 or half a dozen key activities that we're really trying to capture. These activities are often connected to use cases, user storyboards, activities that really help us see the broader context of those activities. And those I'll kind of loop back around to that at the end. Those are opportunities actually to use Weave in another way as well. But essentially, we start out with activities. We try to break down what are the key activities for this particular outcome. And I go first in breadth, and then I go in depth. So once we've got the key activities defined, we talk about what are the tasks, user tasks, not tasks as in sub-children of user stories, but tasks that the user would perform to achieve those activities. And then from there, then we begin breaking down that task into stories. And so it's really just a model for breaking down work into highly more complex pieces into lower, less complex pieces, and helping us get a sense of not only breadth of the solution, which helps us understand gaps and key dependencies, but also start getting into some depth at the beginning of our planning to help us know which direction we need to start and where we need to head maybe over the course of a release. And so different teams use story mapping in different ways, but this is the basic idea. Okay. Let's go on to the next slide there.
Yeah, that would be an awesome thing if I could do that.
It's doing it to it.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. So the basic model here is we want to create the stories, then we're going to fill it in and validate the stakeholders with the stakeholders. So in other words, we build the map and then we walk the map. And walking the map is really important, something we can't really demonstrate here, but it's about really getting on the wall what we think is what we should be building. And then it's about bringing important people in that may not have been able to be there to fill in the gaps, bringing important leadership in, let's say, to help them understand what's the priorities, maybe bringing other teams by to help understand here's the dependencies we identified, and we need to work together to break those out more. And then really it's taking the next step and really making sure that we are using this information for our release planning and our sprint planning, maybe our MVP planning, depending on how we're structured from an Agile perspective. So this is the basic process.
So basically, if I kind of shoot back to here, this is
Mm-hmm.
when you say walk the map, this is what people are doing. And how long does this, if you're doing it, in this kind of low tech, I guess the physical way,
Mm-hmm.
how long does this live on a wall, and who's walking by at various points and interacting with you on improving it?
Right. So in many organizations, a story map lives the entire course of the project or over a particular period of the value stream. It may be that we work through all the activities. It may be that we get partway through and say, nope, we've got enough value, so we're done. But generally speaking, the story map lives and breathes until we're satisfied with the value that we've delivered.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be even on a sprint to sprint basis in some cases, if it's small enough, or it could be in a multi-year scenario. So it really depends on the scope of the activity we're trying to achieve. And then the other thing is that many times if you have other tools that you're using, the Jira or version 1 or Rally or something else like that, then some teams are actually going to translate these directly import the data into their tool of choice. And then the story map itself kind of becomes moot, and it's really tracked in the
Hmm.
electronically. And so the opportunity we have with Weave is really, because it doesn't have to be over the day your planning is done, it can live on. And so that's definitely one of the models that people can explore.
Hmm. Right.
So here's just kind of an example, a simplified example of what a story map might look like. There are a couple other pieces I didn't talk about, the vision and goals and personas. We'll kind of get to that in a minute. But really, that those key activities that we're trying to explore from a user's perspective are the roadmap of maybe MVPs or an MVP. And then we, obviously are trying to break down the work into stories, define our releases, understand, how we're going to chunk the work up for delivery and development, maybe identify things that are risky or critical or important. And so at the end of the day, you have this map that really does give you a lot of context into, what your plan is going forward. And then obviously the goal would be to keep that updated and alive all the time, so that you can really keep track of what's happening. Because it's a very visual paradigm, and this is what I'm really excited for Weave about, is that it really makes it easy to sort of just look and see what's there, and makes it easier to see gaps, makes it easier to explore relationships between stories or epics or activities, maybe explore how other personas should be interacting with a particular activity that we didn't anticipate. So to me, the visual side of this is very important. You can do all of this in a spreadsheet, but at the end of the day, creating the visual aspect of this really enables people to think in a different way, and that's super helpful.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess having it like this makes it more appealing. Like you actually want to look at it as well. It's like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, and some of the large organizations that I've worked with and coached for in the past maintain these on their wall, along with other kinds of release wall mappings, and they're hugely valuable. Execs walk it; they can see what's happening. They're kept up to date all the time. And the wonderful thing about having it online is that now I'm not just limited to walking the wall where I'm at the main headquarters. I can walk the wall from anywhere in the world that my team members or leadership or business stakeholders might be.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that most companies struggle with that, even if you're small. I mean, Catania is a lot smaller than Micron, and we still have a distributed development and business partner team. So even small companies have to deal with, okay, well, for people who aren't at corporate, who aren't able to walk the physical wall, how do you bring them in so that everyone stays aligned?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so this is the beautiful canvas that all of you will see and weave when you go in to take a look at it. But if you want to walk us through this, that would be great.
Sure. So a couple points of reference. So you see on the far left side, at the top left corner, is our vision and goals. That's really critical. And then what I'm going to do is kind of just outline some of the pieces of the canvas. And then we'll kind of talk about how to use the canvas after we move from here. So
Hmm.
we have our goals, we have our personas, which are important in terms of understanding who's receiving the value. In the center section there at the top, you have your user solutions or initiatives. Many times, those are even broader than maybe a particular set of user activities, and that's why I created that kind of one bar that stretches across the top of one box.
Hmm. The
Because
initiative.
sometimes we have very large solutions or initiatives, and there may be multiples actually that interact um, to really create some holistic solution overall. And so this is just kind of an open space where we're trying to really just get out in the open. What are the key big rocks that we care about? And then the next piece down is really focusing more on the story mapping side, which is the user activities, what some people might call big rocks or pieces that of the solution that become an MVP or minimal marketable feature set of some kind. And then the next piece down is our user tasks. They're the yellow boxes. So the green boxes and the yellow boxes are really the two levels of story mapping. And then you can see below that, then we've got these swim lanes that really represent the releases. So we have some basic information about the releases, the goals, And then what Jeff Patton likes to use in story mapping is this concept of opening, mid, and end game. And that really just helps us understand, if there's some key foundational work that we have to do, maybe in the first couple sprints before we can really build on it due to dependencies that we have. We're going to try to identify those right up front. And so, some organizations will take story mapping and then continue breaking it down into full-on quarterly based sprint mapping and mapping out each sprint in terms of the stories. So this kind of gives you a way to do that. And the nice thing is you can start very high level and then add more detail as you go. And then on the right-hand side, you kind of see the attendees, notes, and actions and icon key. The icons you can see on the far right of the slide here are those icons that I've created to use for this particular canvas. I want attendees to put their name in there, and we'll see how that works. I use the light bulb there for the goals that back in that vision and goals box. Release information, note card there, and then some personas. Different kinds of user activities. So these user activities are really the tasks or the work that's getting done. So I'm going to use those yellow stickies up in the user solutions box. I'm going to use the green stickies in the green boxes. And I kind of flubbed up on my colors a little bit. So my next version of this, I'd like to change how I do the stickies so that the colors on the canvas match the colors of the sticky. But I didn't do this for this particular go around.
If we could only be perfect the first time we do something,
I know,
be amazing.
We wouldn't need Agile, I guess. So, basically using those stickies to flesh out our solutions. The user stories will be going down in the release map area. And then trying to use also ways to flag work. It could be a whole set of a user tasks. It could be a particular one that's risky, it's critical, important, or there's key dependencies. So this really constitutes the full canvas. And one quick note as we get into this is just that, this is assuming that quite a few things have already happened. It's assuming that we understand some of our initial stakeholders. It's assuming that we understand who our personas are, at least the key ones. It assumes that we know something about our visions and goals. And what's really great about Weave, in my opinion, is that there's these other great canvases that are out there, these frameworks that other people have created that really helps us do that. So for example, if I'm going into a story mapping and I don't have personas created, I can certainly do them here in simplistic form. But there's some really great personas canvases that you can use that really flesh that out. And so you might, for example, do those in a pre-session before your story mapping, or you might do it as the first part or one of the first parts of your actual story mapping session. So those are just some thoughts to think about. We'll kind of explore that a little bit more as we keep talking here. And then I put some instructions there. So I would encourage everyone to try this out, and I'd love to get your feedback. I'll provide my contact information for you. But I'd love to get your feedback on how you're using it and what may be wrong with it. And just go ahead and extend it and build your own and see how easy that is to do. So.
Yeah, and actually, it's a good jumping off point to remind people that you can contact framework authors right from inside Weave. And so if this is one that you want to just, reach out to Jason and say, hey, what about this? Or here's a suggestion. From inside Weave, you can contact him. Or if there's other frameworks in there, again, you can figure out who the framework author is and then shoot them a message inside Weave to ask questions if you have them that way as well.
Absolutely. One other quick point I wanted to make on this is that this is, I created this story map canvas to be a little bit more self-contained, meaning the boxes and some of the icons and such are intended to create a very specific sort of interaction. The general story mapping you can also do with basically 3 lines on a page. That the stuff at the top or the colored boxes that I have, the stuff in the middle or the bottom 2 sections are the releases. So you don't have to use this to do story mapping, but to me, this gave me a way to actually capture really clearly and be able to extract the data in a very structured way from that visual exercise.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, I built the super easy one, and it's also inside Weave. So if you wanted to look at a really, really simple one with just 3 lines, that's in there too. So
Excellent.
try them both. All right. So I think this is a summary of what you ask people to do or what you ask people to think about. That if you want to run through this briefly, and then we'll actually pop over into Weave and take a look at it inside the platform as well.
Sure. Yeah. Just a couple quick points on this. Really, these are the same exact directions that are on the page itself. So it's just kind of make them a little bit bigger. But the big thing is it is important to really understand what your goals are coming in, understand who your personas are, and really try to work the map as it's intended. And that's the number 11 down there at the bottom. Is first you work in breadth, and then you work in depth. If you try to go depth first, you're just going to get totally sidetracked, and especially for key stakeholders that might be there, they're going to be really not used as effectively as they could be. So I would definitely keep that in mind as you're working through story mapping, whether you're using this framework or any other. But in general, this gives you the order to proceed. So that's about it.
Okay. All right. So the next step is for everybody to get into Weave. Let me see if I can make that happen. I'm telling you, I end up messing around with the presentation and then I can't make it move. All right, so there's a couple ways you can get in there. I see that some people are already in what we call the lobby, which is great. But if you're not there yet, there's a couple of ways to get there. You can log into Weave, and from Weave on your dashboard, you have this little green arrow. And by the way, I absolutely wish that we had tooltips everywhere. It is one of my biggest personal pet peeves of our own platform. So that will be, it's on our short list for sure. You'll see those start to show up in the platform. So they're lacking the tooltip that I wish we had. It's this little green join button up here. It'll pop up a front door, and it's that 9-digit code that you need to type in to join this particular forum. So as you guys can see, you're all popping in, which is fantastic. If you have not set up a trial version yet, I know there's a few people on the call who are not yet customers, just joining will actually create your 30-day trial. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start this. Jason, do you need the URL? Because you should join too.
Yeah, that would be great. Can you post that to me?
Yeah, let me stick it into chat as well. The ID is 257-289-760. So that's the, oops, I should send it to everybody and not just John. Here we go. This is to everybody. Okay, so that's the 9-digit code that you can type in. So for the rest of you guys, yep, just get into Weave and then go that way. And I'll go ahead and start this.
Oops.
And then what I'll do is share my screen just in case if there's anyone who wants to also take a look at what the facilitator version of this looks like. You'll be able to see some of the controls that I have as a facilitator, which are a little bit different than what you would have if you were, a just an attendee. All right. So I think probably, Jason, I'd love to hear from you how you start something like this with your attendees. So normally you have some kind, and I'm guessing because this is how I would use it, but normally I would have a kickoff meeting where I may also have if we're in person, I would still have people log into Weave, and we may all be sitting with laptops in a meeting room, and we all join a canvas like this that we all have independent access to. Sometimes I'm in meetings where part of us are in person and the other attendees might be coming in from different locations. And so we might have a conference call set up as well. But typically what I'm doing is just reviewing what the canvas has on it, how you would, how you want to navigate through it, and then what the icons mean. So is that typically how you start one of these as well?
Yeah, and I also generally start with just what are the main sections of the screen that they're looking at. So I'll talk about the chat on the left, I'll talk about the board in the middle, and I'll talk about the palette on the right. And
Hmm.
so that's usually helpful. And but part of the reason why I actually created the attendees list, not just because I could potentially get that through Skype or whatever I'm using, but it also gives people a way to start participating that's non-committal, that helps them to see how to move the stickies around. And generally, it only takes two, 3, 4, or 5 minutes of just talking about what it is first time around, and people just jump right in and start doing it. So it's been super simple for me.
So the first one, I guess, is, the first icon that somebody drags onto the board is the only time they have to learn how to do it, right? Once you do one, it's
Exactly.
easy. Yeah. So in this case, I'm sure you just want people to write their name, and this
Uh-huh.
one.
And so one thing just to note for everyone who may not have used Weave before, there's two things. The question mark at the very top of the screen, the little slider question mark, opens and closes the information screen. So if that's kind of in your way and you're wondering how to get rid of it, that's how you do it. That's useful for just describing what it is you're trying to achieve with the session. And then one other quick note is I've created the icon key and you can see all those icons there, but don't grab from there to put an icon on the board. Grab the icon from the far right palette. So that's something I always point out to folks because they generally wind up moving my icon key somewhere else. So I'm going to drag and drop mine as well. And, obviously for the attendees, put your name in there and hit create. Sometimes I'm going to be asking for other information. If they're maybe a group that I'm not familiar with, I'm going to be asking for information about the organization that they're in. Obviously, most for story mapping, I should know who they are, but it also is helpful for people to put their contact information sometimes to make it easy. So I always start with attendees, and then
So,
the
Jason, I'm just
Mhm.
going to interrupt you here. So for those of you who are looking at my screen, if you want to flip over, one of the things that also is good to do, and again, as soon as someone learns it, you never have to talk about it again. But the ability to zoom in and move the canvas to the spot that you're in. So at the moment, we're looking at the attendees section. So when I zoom in and move that corner over, then it cleans itself up in the sense that the icons that people are moving for their names, they remain small, and it's just easier to avoid the kind of the overlapping that way. But then at some point we would be done with talking about, okay, we're joined and here we are as attendees. And if you click the little return to normal size, the return arrow, then it goes back to its original size, and you can see, it looks pretty complicated up there in the corner. So one of the things that we've decided to do with Weave is to let people upload images that are actually huge. Like in some of the ones that I upload, and I can't remember what this one is, Jason, but some of them that I've uploaded, I've optimized them from a pixel standpoint to print at like poster size, 3 feet by 4 feet, kind of super big, which means you
Yeah.
can zoom in almost infinitely.
Well, and that's actually, I love the infinite zoom aspect of this. And that's one of the next versions of this improvements I'm going to make to the map is do this in super high definition so that you can zoom in and have it super clear.
Yeah. Yeah. It is handy to have that capability. So,
And
okay.
just as a side note on that too, one of the things I've found, especially if you're in a multi-team scenario, um, you can zoom into one piece of it and just have kind of little circles where you kind of just create a space for teams to do something on their own or people to do something on their own. Create notes or things that maybe they just you know
Hmm.
don't know where else to put it on the board. So that's something, and that's one reason why I created the notes slash actions area so that people could have a place to put those
Mm.
spurious thoughts that come along. But yeah, you can kind of zoom in super deep in the spot between the instructions and the text of the board over the box and put 10 stickies in there. And
Mm.
so it's kind of nice to get things. It's kind of a Prezi sort of format if you've
Yeah,
used Prezi.
without spinning and making me, motion sick.
There you go.
Yeah. So as a facilitator, that reminds me to just point out that you could also, on the fly add a new icon. So it may be that your team's like, look, we have this weird thing that we want to keep track of, and you hadn't anticipated it ahead of time. I could go ahead and, pick a completely different icon and, randomly, I'll just put the heart up there, so maybe we wanted to make sure that we had a time for appreciations that we had for each other. And so as a facilitator, I can make more of those things available, and that might be a perfect reason to throw stuff like that in the notes section as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I learned by just going through this map myself is
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take advantage, or I didn't create an extra space on the board or something to actually drop dependency stickies. So I thought, well, I'm just going to add the dependency icon and use that. So I may actually also adapt the board to have a specific area to drop dependencies to make it even more clear. But for now, I've got a dependency icon, and
Mm-hmm.
that was an add as a direct result of discovering, oh yeah, we need to do that.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so basically it looks like everyone's been able to put their attendees on there. That's super helpful. And that's also helpful not just for the session, but for later when you go back and look at the data. So then the next part would be going through the icon key and making sure that you explain it. In this case, we got to kind of talk about that before we came into the forum. But I would go through the stickies to make it really clear what they should be using them for. In this particular case, because I have very specific meanings to them, that's why I have the key there. And if you click on some of those items, you can see off to the right the item description, which helps the individuals in the forum to understand, okay, what do I use that icon for? So that was super helpful. And so once I get through the icon keys, and then we talk about, obviously if we need to talk about story mapping or something, we might be doing that. Let's say people understand story mapping, then we're going to move directly into the vision goals. I'm going to usually zoom into that box, and you can see kind of the little icons that are there. These are just kind of a model that Jeff uses in his story mapping book, which is the kite and the water and the fish. So obviously kite is high level things, fish are low level things. And you can actually use these in various paradigms. It could be, more general goals to more specific goals. It could be, more customer focused goals versus more technical focused goals. So you can actually use these in lots of different ways. I just generally try to keep it simple and say, the high level things are high level goals, and the fish is for lower level goals and maybe lower priority goals. So once we kind of go through and work together as a team, talking about what our vision and goals are, it gives us a much better idea of what we're really talking about from an overall solution perspective. We would drag and drop, just like you're doing, the little light bulb there, and specifically type, in the name field there, what is the goal, and then we would describe some key aspects of that goal. Generally speaking, this is where you need to sort of decide in advance how much detail you are asking from your folks in the forum. Are you asking them to give you detailed specifics? Are you asking them to give you general information? And I would just make that really clear by defining that in your key, your item key, and that way they can go back and refer to that and say, oh yeah, I need to have these 3 specific items in the goal icon, or the goal the goal icon. So we'll go through the vision and goals, and of course, one of the things I actually didn't talk about before we started is who you have in your story mapping is super important, but that really has more to do with story mapping. So having a clear understanding that your key stakeholders there are super important, and making sure that you bring out these goals and visions, because if you don't do that right first, then you start going down the road of creating a lot of details about something that's just not important, at least not yet. So the next piece then is move into the personas section, and this is where we'll typically try to use a predefined persona. Now, if you're in a situation where you do not have some persona defined, or maybe you come across a new one you didn't realize you needed, you can obviously add them along the way. And as I recommended before, use one of the persona frameworks to really flesh that persona out. Cool thing is with Weave is you can take these different canvases and you can put them all together into one space in the forum. So you could have a persona, a whole nother canvas that's right to the left of the story mapping canvas, let's say, and actually use that to help flesh out your personas, or maybe if you have a new persona you need to build, um, that it's there as a reference. So that's probably something I'm going to do with this story mapping, is actually extend this out to a forum for big room planning, but we're actually doing a lot more than just story mapping activities. We're going into maybe persona creation, stakeholder management type of topics in terms of who's really the most important to be making certain kind of decisions, those kinds of things. So the
And by the
personas
way,
gives us.
you know, if you guys on the, you know, who are logged into this, if you want to just add items, I mean, I know a lot of you are kind of experts on this, so you don't feel obligated to do it. But if you wanted to play around with it a little bit, you can do that in the background while Jason's talking.
Absolutely, yeah. And for sure, if you have any cool ideas for me or things that we can share from each other, drop those on the board somewhere so we can read them. That'd be awesome. So then the next part then, of course, is moving into our solutions and initiatives. And so these are going to be the big deal. There may be just one thing there. What is the one thing that we're going to break down? Maybe it's a series of MVPs that we're going to start breaking apart. But I'm going to just, you know, pull one over there and say this is MVP 1, big deal. And so I'm going to, you know, drag and drop a few things on there. Then as we start talking about it, making sure that these truly are those initiatives that are important. Do they align to our vision and goals? Do we have the right personas in place to even deal with that? Are we missing people in the room that we really should have there for that discussion? It may be that we have a couple different MVPs that are really important, but we don't have enough people really to talk about MVP 2. Kind of at the last minute, somebody wasn't able to come, and so we just really want to understand, you know, what are the things we can focus on in this session. Then obviously the next goal is to start breaking down user activities. So you know, I'm going to be looking at the next pieces of the next large chunks of that activity, and depending on your organization, I've called on my icon key epics and features. You may have a different hierarchy than I do. We use Jira, so we have to use Jira or epics at a lower hierarchy than, for example, SAFe uses. In SAFe, for example, epics are big and features are small, and for us, it's the opposite because of our limitations in Jira. So, but I might have some high-level epic as a user activity, and I grabbed the one out of the icon key, and so big rock. So I just simply move down there, and obviously you're having discussion about what are the key activities here, what is the user doing, or what is the system doing that's interacting with this. Another place that you may use another canvas here and use it as a reference during the session is for use cases. If you use use cases or user scenarios, which are really story maps or user maps of how they might walk a set of user activities. So that's something, if you've done that in advance, it's super helpful to have, you know, maybe off to the left or below or above the different the canvas that we're using right now. And so then I'm going to just keep breaking it down, you know, looking at the next level items for my user slices or smaller rocks. I wanted to really kind of put epic and feature and such out there for the user activities and user slices, but because it varies in different organizations, I just went with more standard language. You could for sure use the language that Jeff Patton uses, which is the activities and tasks. So if you want to be safe, you can certainly always do that. But one of the things that always throws me off from a facilitation perspective, if people aren't really used to doing story mapping and don't understand that tasks are not tasks that developers do, but tasks that users do, sometimes it kind of throws them off with that language. So just to be aware, if you haven't, you know, depends on how you do story mapping for yourself. If you haven't done it before, something to be considering. And so then as you're moving down into your release, then before I go further and continue breaking down the stories, I really want to stop, if I haven't already in the session, and really define clearly what's some of my release metadata, name, date, key outcomes as goals. So those are definitely, things that you can do as well. So I'm going to put one up here, release 1. And those are important because then as you move into your breaking down of stories, we can see, okay, out of these maybe 3 main user activities, what do we really need to have in the first iteration of MVP1? And it depends again on how you're structured, if you're using SAFe or something else. But at any rate, the basic idea then obviously is you break down stories and you begin assigning them to different parts of your sprint plan or your release plan. So I might create some foundation stories. I might create some UI or some other business logic created along the way. And then along the way, I might realize that, okay, I've got a key dependency on something. So I'm just going to drag and drop those up there. So obviously it's pretty simple in terms of how you drag and drop things here. In terms of facilitation, when you're in a session, when you're in a room, sometimes all those side conversations can work against you if you're not careful. But that's actually something I kind of like about is that it kind of keeps us focused a little bit. But if there are side conversations that need to happen and people are maybe on a separate Skype session or something, they can actually be working on some other aspect, maybe defining the release goals in more detail while another team is kind of looking at what are some of the basic stories to start with. So that's basically how we use it. If there's opportunities to capture notes for the future, I'm going to throw those up there. If I've got information that I want for how to really manage my session better next time, I can do that. So these are kind of the areas that I've found are useful for story mapping. And obviously your particular approach to story mapping may not include everything that's here. Or you may have some other things that you found that are super important you can add. So I encourage you guys to try it out. But really, I think those are the key aspects of it. Any questions?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? And you can throw them into chat, or if you want to save yourself typing too much, I can unmute you as well if I know who wants to ask one out loud.
Or did you have the results of your poll as well?
I did. Let's see. What does that tell me? There we go. So it looks like 5 people doing it and loving it, 2 people it's new, 2 people with a plan to use it, 1 person trying and struggling, and 1 person is not doing story mapping yet. Okay. And we have some Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, product owner, and UI UX, and a mystery other.
So yeah, I mean, this is definitely a really great method, in my opinion, of really trying to getting the right people in the room. Make sure as a product owner, that you really have a clear idea of what you're trying to deliver. Because the reality is that you don't know everything. There's no way. You need the team there to help you. You need your key stakeholders there to help you. And so having them participate in your forum, and they may be halfway around the world or just in the room, but being able to add that data along the way and sort of not interrupt the overall flow is pretty helpful.
Scotty has a question that he put into Weave, which is great. So how are you handling the folks who aren't adept at breaking down products by features and components and technical dependencies? Is that something that you're working with as a predecessor to story mapping, or is the story mapping helping with that?
I think the story mapping does help with that a lot. I know that when I've done this in the past with folks that are totally brand new to it, It provides a coaching opportunity for me. It definitely is true though that if you have people that are totally brand new to it, it's good to have a pre-session and talk about what are stories and what are epics, and go through maybe some of the agile, the Scrum format for a story, and what are acceptance criteria and things of that nature, because just having them have a basic foundation is helpful. Sometimes you have stakeholders that don't have any idea, and they don't have to know a lot, but sometimes that is helpful. And the whole idea of breaking this down is trying to do it from a user's perspective. So in terms of features versus components and technical dependencies. My first round of this is going really at that high level, is all totally customer based or user based. And then as we start breaking it down into the team side and we start looking at technical dependencies, a lot of times the product owner or maybe the other key stakeholders wind up sitting back and just kind of listening more. But then the team is kind of working through the details, and it gives them the option to really ask a lot of questions that are very relevant. So you generally find that the customers are doing a lot of the speaking up front, the team is doing a lot of speaking in the middle, and then you have this great opportunity to really work together on some of the sticking points. So I see the program level across 9 countries, 110 teams. We put emphasis on mapping, value stream mapping, and then talk about the delivery of value in groups that are conditioned to deliver entire solutions. Yes. Yeah, so obviously this can be used definitely in different ways. And so if you're in if you're in a situation where, especially a very large solution, that can be very helpful to do some of the value stream mapping up front. I agree. I think that would be also a cool canvas to do with this. But one of the things I really like about story mapping, just in general, is the fact that it's very user focused, and sometimes our value stream mapping, it depends on if you're talking about business process value stream mapping or if you're talking about sort of technical delivery value stream mapping. But obviously talking about full solutions is kind of the point here. And then, many times I've had to do on follow-up sessions with the development teams to come in here and really flesh it out. And you might spend 2 or 3 days actually doing that, especially on a big or complicated MVP. And as they break those details out, you often will have a need to loop folks back around, walk the wall with some of your stakeholders. And so you might not need to get the whole group together. And that's exactly why it's helpful to have this map, because you can just bring them right back into the session. And walk it with them and talk about the details and the questions and capture notes that you need, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that actually is something useful, not just in the context of story mapping, but there are so many times where we refer back to the point we left off last time, and it's just such a relief to not have to redo or rediscuss as many things as you normally would have to if you didn't have a visual.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely agree, Scotty, in terms of number one rule there, cross-functional teams for sure. I mean, you really want to be cross-functional, and cross-functional from a stakeholder perspective as well, because your stakeholder A and needs to know what stakeholder B cares about, and this may be the first time they've ever actually had that conversation. I've been in that situation before, so it's super helpful to have that cross-functionality there. And then in the question about using this with customers, users, I have, and that was kind of in a context where there were data scientists that were kind of key stakeholders as well as key users, and I treated them just exactly the same as I would other stakeholders. So that worked out pretty well. I can definitely imagine situations where it would be nice to have some user feedback as well, and so I've done it not in Weave, but I've done it on the walking the wall in other locations, and bringing actual users by once we've outlined kind of the plan, is to kind of walk them through that and just get some feedback from them, because I think that is helpful.
So my next, before I lose all you guys, the next question that's actually important to me as well is to figure out what should we do next. So keep asking questions. but before I lose people, because we're getting close to the end of the hour, I also wanted to find out, are there other frameworks that you would like us to go through in this kind of 1 hour session about, for particular use cases or purposes? And then, yeah, any other questions, you can type them into chat or let me know if you want me to take you off of mute. And then I'll ask you one while I'm waiting to see if anyone else has any. But so from a lessons learned standpoint, I know that you talked about you'd like to make the canvas a little bit bigger from a pixel standpoint so you could zoom in even further.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to do a little bit more with color coding, maybe even add another area for a parking lot. John Westworth has a font suggestion,
Okay.
which just to change the font to something that's slightly more readable, although that might also be cured with just, if you zoom in so much and it starts to get pixelated if it were a little bit higher resolution. But what
Sure.
else, when you're building these canvases, it sounds like you prepare for multiple versions, but are there any other lessons learned or things that you could tell folks to kind of make them more efficient when they start to build their own canvases? And do you have any suggestions for people?
Yeah, so my key suggestion is don't do it by yourself. I kind of started that way, but I've fortunately had, as a coach, done it a lot. So I kind of have been there and done that, but I would get other people with you to talk about it. And then I used just a simple diagramming tool, and it's a little bit cartoony that some people don't like. So you can be more precise and get your fonts a little cleaner and such if you want, but PowerPoint works pretty good for putting the initial one together, and then you can maybe get it off to your local graphics person in-house and see if they can build you a really cool big one.
Yeah.
So start simple and iterate. That's my encouragement. Try it once or twice, and maybe in a story mapping session with your team, get some feedback from them, or whatever your canvas is, and then try to extend it. So just be iterative in your thinking.
Yeah, actually, I tend to do that as well, and then I move into Snagit when I want to make it bigger, right? If I want to make it more pixely, but yeah, it'd be awesome to have somebody I could hand it to also, who are really graphically oriented. But it's really great what you can do with just PowerPoint and Snagit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are right at the top of the hour. I want to make sure that we let folks go. But in terms of the polling, it looks like road mapping, retrospectives, portfolio management, and those are definitely people responded to those. I'll leave it up for a couple more minutes if anyone else wants to respond. Kathy, I agree. We should move on to personas as well. So if anyone has frameworks they want to share with us in the same way that Jason did, please reach out to me and let me know. I would love to hear what our community is doing and really help, connect people in the community to each other so that we can start sharing a lot of these best practices and Canvas ideas and ideas for extending frameworks and that kind of thing. And Jason, thank you so much for being the first person to do this. I really appreciate you making this available to the weavers of the world and for giving us an hour today to talk about story mapping. This has been great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would highly encourage you to go out and try to make some. My encouragement is there's a lot of opportunities for us as coaches and agilists to maybe build some frameworks that other people know that we use, and just get them out there and share it. That'd be really cool, and I'd love to meet you out there on the forum.
All right. Well, I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of your Tuesday, and hopefully you'll join another one of ours coming up in the future. Thanks, everybody.